はい、皆さん、こんにちは。時間になりましたので、シンポジウムの方を始めさせていただきたいと思います。本日はご参加賜りましてありがとうございました。今から、シンポジウム AI 以後の人文社会科学を問うを、開催させていただきます。本日は、サウスオーストラリア大学から、著名な社会学者でもいらっしゃるアンソニー・エリオット先生をお招きいたしまして、まずはご講演を賜りたいと思っております。本日のご講演のタイトルは後で申し上げたいと思いますが、AI に関わる非常に社会学的な重要な問いをご講演賜りまして、その後パネルディスカッションと進めさせていただきたいと思っております。で、まず最初に開催の挨拶として、藤巻先生から、お話を賜りたいと思います。それでは藤巻先生、よろしくお願いいたします。
はい、皆様こんにちは。今紹介いただきました立命館大学文学部の藤巻と申します。開会の挨拶に、ということでございますが、本来ならばこの主催者である人文科学研究所所長のですね、遠藤英樹教授が、主催者側の代表としてご挨拶すべきところでございますが、遠藤教授は今回のシンポジウムの、コーディネーターでありまして、さらにパネリストでもあるということで、私が代わってご挨拶をさせていただく次第であります。さて、このシンポジウムの基調講演者であるアンソニー・エリオット先生、またパネリストの皆様、この Zoom ウェビナーを視聴されている皆様に対して、主催者側を代表して、歓迎のご挨拶を述べたく存じます。また、この度の、ウェビナーのテクニカルサポートおよび同時通訳を担っておられる皆様にもですね、感謝の意を表したく存じます。この度のシンポジウムは、新型ウイルス、コロナウイルス、COVID-19 下の下での開催となりました。この Zoom ウェビナー方式、これは遠藤所長の発案によるものですが、人文科学研究所にとりましても初めての試みでもあります。で、私どももようやくこの Zoom 方式でのですね、研究集会の開催に、ある意味では違和感を覚えることなく、誤解を恐れずに言えば、むしろ利便性とかですね、メリットすら感じられるようになってきた、そういうステージに今来ているのかなというふうに思います。これは高度な情報コミュニケーションテクノロジーの発達によって、そして堅固なバックアップシステムや、テクニカルサポートが備わっておればですね、リアルタイムでの国際的シンポジウムの開催の可能性とそのメリットに気づいていうことで、今回のような方式に至った次第です。で、さてアンソニー・エリオット先生をご招待してのシンポジウムはですね、今回で2回目となります。で、第1回目は2018年10月に、立命館大学衣笠キャンパスにて、モバイル・ライブス・アンド・アフターというテーマのご講演をいただきました。で、その後ですね、昨年2019年の10月にですね、実は今回の AI 以降の人文社会科学を問うというテーマでのシンポジウムの開催を予定しておりました。そしてエリオット先生も日本におられたんですが、ちょうどご帰国にあたる時期にですね、台風19号が関西を直撃するということになりまして、急遽ですね、中止とさせていただきました。基調講演者であるエリオット先生のご帰国がですね、大変危うくなったということでございます。で、そこで2020年、今年の3月末にですね、改めてエリオット先生をお招きして、このシンポジウムの開催企画をしたんですけども、今度はですね、この COVID-19 の蔓延の兆しに留意しまして、延期を余儀なくされたということでございます。いかに人間の空間的な移動、モビリティがいかに脆弱なものであるかということが改めて痛感された次第であります。で、というわけで、今回はようやく、にしてですね、満を持しての、シンポジウム開催となりまして、大変私どももう安堵しているところであります。ひとえに高度な情報コミュニケーションテクノロジーの発達の 賜物と言える次第であります。で、今回の、AI に絡むですね、人文学、科学、社会科学の分野でもですね、すでにシンポジウム等が開催されておりまして、例えば昨年のですね、日本社会学会では AI と社会学の未来、人工知能は社会的なるものをどう変え、社会学の方法をどう刷新するのかというテーマでのシンポジウムが開催されておりますが、本日はですね、そういった動きと関係しつつもですね、改めてエリオット先生による基調講演と、それからパネルディスカッションを経てですね、より刺激的で、示唆に富む内容での、シンポジウムになるんじゃないかというふうに期待しているところであります。これからちょっと長丁場でございますが、視聴者の皆様方のですね、ご視聴を期待するところであります。以上、簡単でございますけれども、歓迎の意を表すべく、開会の挨拶とさせていただきます。どうもありがとうございました。
藤巻先生、ありがとうございました。皆様、同時通訳、今回、準備されております。Zoom の右下の方に、日本語、英語を選ぶ、ところがございますので、そこをクリックして選んでいただいたらと思います。それでは今から、エリオット先生のご講演を賜りたいと思いますが、その前にちょっとエリオット先生のご紹介をこちらでさせていただきたいと思います。少し資料共有をさせていただきます。アンソニー・エリオット先生をこの度、Zoom ではございますが、招聘をいたしまして、ご講演を賜りたいと思っております。で、ご参加いただいた先生方の方がご存知かもしれませんが、アンソニー・エリオット先生は、現在、サウスオーストラリア大学の社会学教授を務めておられます。で、英国のケンブリッジ大学で、アンソニー・ギデンズの指導の下で社会学を学んでおりまして、現在、ホーク EU ジャンモネセンター・オブ・エクセレンスの所長を務めておられます。で、また、アカデミー・オブ・ソーシャル・サイエンス・オーストラリアのフェローでもあり、オーストラリアのアコラっていうところの人工知能専門家ワーキンググループのメンバーでもいらっしゃいます。で、さらには、エリオット先生は、社会理論、あるいは現代社会学にとって非常に重要な業績を世に送り出してこられました。ご著書には、皆様ご承知のように、ジョン・アーリーとの共著でもあるモバイルライブズ、こちらは、私も携わらせていただいて、ミネルバ書房よりモバイルライブズとして、翻訳が2016年に出版されております。このほか、リインベンション、アイデンティティトラブル、それからザ・カルチャー・オブ・ AI など、多数ございます。で、さらに言えば、ザ・カルチャー・オブ・ AI は本日のパネリストのお一人でもある、須藤先生と私の方で、翻訳も現在進めておりまして、明石書店から出版予定となっております。で、このようにエリオット先生のご著書っていうのが非常にたくさんございます。で、本日のご講演は、この右側に今出ております、The Culture of AI の内容と非常にオーバーラップする内容になるのかなっていうふうに期待しているところでございます。で、ご講演の内容ではございますが、AI 後の時代の中で、人文社会科学はどのように自らを刷新していくべきなのか。これを、本日のご講演と、それからその後のシンポジウムで、考えてまいりたいと思っております。で、特にエリオット先生の本日のご講演、チャットボット、Talk and the Engineering of Identity っていう、そこでは、機械間のコミュニケーション通信はもちろんのことですが、人と機械のトーク、人と機械の間のトークが日常的になる時代の中で、これまでの コミュニケーション、あるいは対話、あるいは自我っていうものを問題にしてきた、これまでの社会学っていうものを、どのように考えていくべきなのかっていうところが、非常に問われるようになってきている。で、これまでの社会学が刷新される必要性を、主張されるというふうに思っております。で、AI の複雑なシステム、チャットボットであるとか、先進的なロボット工学であるとか、ビッグデータっていうものは、先ほど申し上げたように、社会学者のアービン・ゴフマンっていう、社会学者が論じたように、社会的相互作用、それからトーク、それから自我の形成っていうものと密接に結びつきながら、それらの在り方を大きく変容させているのではないでしょうか。この点について本日のご講演では議論されることになると思います。それでは、エリオット先生、よろしくお願い申し上げます。エリオット先生、よろしくお願いします。
Well, minasan konnichiwa, and I'd like to begin by thanking Endo Sensei for that very kind introduction. And to say at the outset, it's really a great pleasure for me to come back to Japan, to come back and visit Ritsumeikan University, and to, of course, be doing this virtually. I'm going to be making all sorts of claims this afternoon about the way the digital revolution is transforming our world, and what a very different world that world is fast becoming. But at the same time, it's important to recognize various limits to digitalization. So on the one hand, I'm very glad that we can actually get together to do this through digital means. On the other hand, I wish I could actually be there with you all in person. Like to thank Fujimaki Sensei for his kind remarks. That's indeed the case. Interesting to hear that it was 2018 that I previously visited. I seem to recall it felt certainly much, much closer than 2018. And of course, I remember well being in a hotel room in Osaka, waiting to come out to join the work of the symposium, and not being able to do so because of those disastrous conditions last year. Let us all hope that 2021 will be a much more kinder year, and that we can resume these sort of visits face to face. It's been my good fortune to, I actually visited Ritsumeikan University for the first time. I think it was in 2013. I work in global engagement for the University of South Australia, and I met with your previous vice president for research. So I know the university a little bit. I didn't know Professor Endo back then. It was a colleague of mine working in Tokyo, the legendary sociologist Masataka Katagiri Sensei suggested that I should start reading Professor Endo's work because of my interest in mobilities, and that wasn't possible at that point. What I was trying to read, most of Professor Endo's writings were, the large bulk of them were in Japanese, but in the time that I've actually got to know Professor Endo, and that it was my good fortune that he helped translate a book of mine into Japanese, that I now know his work much, much better because not only Professor Endo, but many of his colleagues that are joining us, the eminent panel for the discussion later, this new and very important book, Understanding Tourism Mobilities in Japan, is now published in English. And indeed, Professor Endo's work continues to become of increasing significance to sociology in the Anglo-American world, and I think rightly so. So It's really against that backdrop that in terms of this talk today, I'm wanting to, in the time that I have, and I think I've got about 45 minutes available to me left, that let me turn that off so that that doesn't keep sumimasen, making demands on our time. Let me share, or try to share this now with everyone, which is the PowerPoint. Hopefully that's worked. So this talk, Chatbots talk and the re-engineering of identity. In my work, as Endo Sensei has sketched out, over the last 5 years especially, I've been trying to come up with a term that I think best encapsulates what it's like to live in a world of advanced and intensive artificial intelligence. And instead of saying artificial intelligence throughout this talk, let me, just like everyone else, use the term AI. Been trying to think of what it's like to live in a world of intensive AI. And for better or for worse, a term that I've come up with that I use in some of my writing. Oh, that didn't work. Thank you. Is this term technological tsunami. A technological tsunami, ladies and gentlemen, by which I'm referring to the fact that women and men today, I want to argue, are increasingly finding that their identities, their core sense of self, if you will, is being rendered increasingly unfit for purpose as a result of the intrusion of digital technologies into the fabric of their very lives. This is the discovery, I think, that more and more people are making, certainly in the expensive, polished cities of the West, but not only there, that they need to undertake a set of revisions, that they need to undertake a set of restructurings, a set of reorganizations, a set of recalibrations of their identities, and largely, through these things that we carry around with us, largely by getting hold of the latest iPhone or taking the latest Uber update or getting hold of the newest Fitbit tracker in order to be able to get on and to confront the challenges of everyday life. And yet, curiously more than that, because also the insidious implantation of anxiety that whatever reorganizations, whatever recalibrations, whatever restructurings of their identities that they're seeking to undertake through digital transformation, this gnawing worry at the back of your mind that, whilst this might be good enough to see you through the challenges that you're going to face today, this worry at the back of your mind that these latest updates and downloads and the newest gadgets won't be good enough to see you through the challenges that you're going to face tomorrow. And that therefore, that this whole process is going to start again tomorrow from scratch and on in a kind of infinite regress. Now, this world of technological tsunami, ladies and gentlemen, I'm wanting to suggest to you, it is certainly these things. So by technological tsunami, I mean smartphones, I mean smart environments, I mean smart cities, but I mean much more than just that. I mean the entirety of the digital revolution. So artificial intelligence, advanced robotics, accelerating automation, machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, big data, and the Internet of Things, which of course is now fast becoming the Internet of everything. And, as if all of that is not mind-bending enough, as if all of that is not staggering enough for us as social scientists to have to try and deal with and grapple with, I think it's also really important to bear in mind, but I won't have any time to talk about this afternoon, that these transformations, the transformations of technological tsunami, are actually unfolding at precisely the historical moment that we have another series of global transitions occurring, namely transitions today in nanotechnology, biotechnology, as well as a series of transformations occurring in information science more generally. So technological tsunami, the digital revolution, as we know, this debate over the digital revolution, it's not just an academic debate. It's a debate that's also a public debate. And when a debate goes from being nowhere to suddenly being everywhere, you can be sure that that debate has succeeded by controversy. And that's undeniably the case in terms of the digital revolution. It's pretty hard today, I think, to open a newspaper, to turn on the radio, to switch on the TV without encountering some story about how AI is transforming our lives, without some story about how robots are taking our jobs, without some story about huge ethical dilemmas arising in the wake of the digital revolution. And I think, when all of that starts happening, there are very good reasons why more and more women and men are starting to get, a little bit worried about why it is that this technological tsunami is starting to unfold, and where it is that artificial intelligence is actually starting to lead us to as a society. Now, one reason that women and men, I think, are getting more worried about what's happening in the world today is because, arguably they've got good reason to be getting worried, because there have been some fairly eminent social scientists, some fairly remarkable global public intellectuals issuing all sorts of dire warnings, all sorts of really, cataclysmic statements about this brave new world that we're being propelled into. So, just here are a few, and I'm sure many of you know these. So for someone like Elon Musk, who, presumably a person who knows something about digital disruption, AI represents a fundamental risk to the very existence of our world. For the Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom, he has written this best-selling book called which is called Superintelligence. Sorry, I'm just starting to hear Japanese translation coming through on the audio, so it's gone now, sorry. So Nick Bostrom's written this best-selling book called Superintelligence, and he's terribly worried about what will happen when superintelligence outstrips human intelligence. And of course, for the late Cambridge physicist and specialist Stephen Hawking, he raised the whole question about, could artificial intelligence actually represent and spell the end of the world as we know it? So, against that backdrop of those sort of claims, no wonder that women and men are getting fairly worried about what's going on in their worlds. Now, in today's talk, I'm going to, and largely because I want everyone to sleep well tonight and not be too traumatized by the nature of what we're discussing, I'm going to be suggesting that we simply put to one side these really big, broad, existential claims and worries. I'm going to be suggesting that, in fact, the discipline that I work in, that sociology, has much to contribute to quite a different understanding of the way AI is impacting our lives in the 21st century. Seems to me that there is still much to be worried about, but I think the great advantage of sociology is that instead of these rather full-blown claims about what might happen in the decades ahead, we can start to take a look at the kind of nature and the dynamics of everyday social life and how the digital revolution is impacting that. So right at the outset, and I'm not going to defend this claim in any detail, but in a lot of my work, I simply make the argument that AI is not what you think. It's always an argument that I'm held hostage to fortune here because as yet, I don't know what it is that you think. I look forward to the comments and question and discussion period following the talk. But in this claim that AI is not what you think, this is a fairly straightforward sociological move. I'm just making the point that AI is not necessarily so much what we think, but it is simply what we do. Yeah, it is just simply what more and more of us do in our everyday lives. You know, every time you take an Amazon recommendation, every time you take a recommendation through Netflix, every time you order an Uber, most of the time when you're, you know, grabbing hold of this device, which is increasingly strapped to your body, you are caught up in many of the logics of artificial intelligence. So AI is not necessarily what you think, but alongside that, there's also another really interesting sociological point, namely that I think the social sciences and the humanities would do well to discard much of the language that's been inherited from Hollywood sci-fi movies about artificial intelligence. That is that we should really junk the idea that it's all about killer robots in the coming decades and cyborgs, and instead recognize that actually AI is a here and now phenomenon. It's a here and now phenomenon, which is fundamentally reorganizing and regrooving much of the texture of everyday life. So in the remainder of the talk, I want to try and do two things. Firstly, I'm simply going to list a whole host of things that I think are fairly self-evident or obvious about these complex AI systems, these complex digital systems that I think are increasingly powering up modern societies and underpinning the daily activities of women and men as we go about our daily activities. I'm going to do that fairly quickly. Secondly, then in the remaining time, I'm going to go on and say something slightly more slowly about the relationship between artificial intelligence on the one hand and transformations, global transformations occurring throughout the world today. Lots of ways I could do that. I could do that by talking about the big debate over AI and robots taking people's jobs, or I could do that by looking at the debate over AI and ethics. But instead, I want to focus on something that hasn't received as much attention across the globe, namely the way AI is impacting on how we communicate with each other, the way in which AI is impacting on the ways in which we communicate and talk with each other, the very nature of human communication, raising the question, which I'd actually like to leave open, so a kind of open question to the esteemed panel joining us later on, as to whether AI in some sense or another represents a wholesale re-engineering of talk and of identities today. We'll come to that. Okay, so for the first part of this, of what remains, let me just talk about these complex digital systems. In my book, The Culture of AI, I actually list something like, I think it's 13 complex systems. I will save you from that. I just want to mention quickly five of the most, what I think are the most important systemic changes resulting from artificial intelligence. Firstly, to underscore something about the extensity of AI, right? The scale and the scope of AI globally. Now, we know that artificial intelligence has its origins in geopolitics, which it both impacts and transforms. I think it's really important to understand that AI is intricately interwoven with the forces of globalization. That's not a claim I'm going to defend in any detail here. I would refer everyone to Richard Baldwin's most recent book, Globotics. Baldwin makes an excellent case for showing how artificial intelligence is interwoven with the forces of globalization, particularly global outsourcing, offshoring, and also reshoring. Tells lots of stories about, hotel rooms in London being cleaned by operators sitting behind their computer terminals in South America, for example, and raises the question, is this the future of the global economy? If you look at the sort of main narrative, if we think of AI as a narrative, that narrative since the 1950s has really fundamentally, I think, been about power. It's been about power, and this is very evident if you look at the whole takeoff of the AI race, the attempt of different nation states to exploit developments in AI innovation and commercialization to the benefit of particular nations. There are, I guess, different ways we could try and map the scale and the scope of AI systems. One way would be to ask the question, well, where are these systems of power? Well, AI is, if you look at the main AI hubs, where are they? They're in Silicon Valley, they're in New York, they're in Boston, they're in London, Beijing, and Shenzhen. That tells us something about these concentrations of power. Another way you could map the scale and the scope of AI systems would be to look at national investment patterns into artificial intelligence. Let me again say sumimasen, and let me apologize in advance. You will probably find this a little difficult to follow, so don't worry about the detail. But if you look at the pretty colors of all these flags, this is a timeline of national investment across the world into artificial intelligence systems. And I found this interesting when as Endo Sensei said earlier, I was appointed by the federal government in Australia to the review of artificial intelligence here to look at what other countries were doing. In 2018, when I was appointed to the work of the ACOLA review, the Australian government was talking about investing some tens of millions of dollars into artificial intelligence, and there was the beginnings of a public debate as to whether, as a country, Australia should do that or not. I don't know whether you think it's a good idea to make such investments. You'll see that Japan was an early developer, and in terms of public policy, back in 2017 in March, the AI technology strategy was put in place by the Japanese government. My point, though, is if you look at all of these different investment strategies, what we were looking to do in Australia really pales in comparison to the level of investment across the world. So, for instance, let's pick one at random. If you look at the UK was looking to invest some 1.3 billion pounds into artificial intelligence by the year 2025. Compare that with France, some 1.8 billion euros into AI by 2025. Again, those figures pale in comparison if you compare them to what's happening on a regional basis. So if you look at the European Union as a whole, the EU has set out a strategy, an investment strategy that totals some 20 billion euros by the year 2025. And alas, that too pales in comparison compared to the countries that are leading the AI race, obviously the United States and China. It's unknown really sort of where that plays out, but we do have figures from China. China's looking to invest some $200 billion into artificial intelligence technologies by the year 2030. So perhaps it's not therefore surprising that one of the world's leading market experts has predicted that by the year 2030, AI might be worth in excess of some $16 trillion to the global economy. The second key systemic feature of AI systems today is that of automaticity. Again, sumimasen, I apologize for such an unlovely term. Only a sociologist comes up with these sorts of terms. All I'm really trying to get at there is to underscore the point that AI is increasingly coming to automate large tracts and sections of our everyday life. The economist Brian Arthur captures that point really well, I think, when he talks about the emergence of a new second economy. Brian Arthur talks about this new second economy, which is parasitic upon it, sits over and above the general economy, but this new second economy, which is computational, which is AI powered, which is increasingly digitalized. Arthur argues, and I quote, he says that this new second economy is running an awful lot of the general economy. It's helping architects design buildings. It's tracking sales and inventory. It's getting goods from here to there. It's executing trades and banking operations. It's controlling manufacturing equipment. It's making design calculations, billing clients, navigating aircraft, and guiding medical surgeries. The third systemic feature, by this, I'm simply trying to underscore that AI has become increasingly wall-to-wall. Yeah, it's increasingly ubiquitous. I think it's increasingly clear that we live in a world which is now everywhere sorting, resorting, coding, and recoding digital information more or less, instantaneously across global networks. So you could think of this really as as a kind of surround. It's like AI as a background wallpaper. And from that point of view, I think it's very interesting that, a little bit like God or globalization, AI is not something that we can directly see. It's not something that people actually generally clap eyes on. It is something that is experienced. It's something that is felt. As the cultural analyst Adam Greenfield says, AI systems are everywhere, W-H-E-R-E, and everywhere, W-A-R-E. These complex systems just, they can't be seen. They're kind of the invisible protological infrastructure of everyday life. But at the same time, they're responsible for the registrations, the calculations, the authorizations, the uploadings and the downloadings that just somehow mysteriously and magically make life happen. The fourth, we're getting through these, AI systems, I think, are increasingly complex and complicated. I'm really trying to underscore here, the point about the so-called exponential growth of artificial intelligence. In technological terms, certainly out of Silicon Valley, Moore's law. Moore's law has been the guiding maxim. Moore's law, of course, referring to the so-called doubling of computing power every 18 months to 2 years. This is to do with the increasing miniaturization of transistors onto computer chips. And there's been, a very big debate in recent years. If you look at the arguments coming out of places like Intel and Microsoft, arguments that, well, the processes of miniaturization, we can't keep making things, there's a limit to how small things can get. Another school of thought has said, no, innovation will be fine. Things will keep accelerating, because if you look at developments today in quantum computing conjoined to cloud computing, these levels of very high levels of technological innovation will continue throughout this century. I can't answer that particular debate and how that's going to play out, but my point is the complex and complicated nature of AI as a system is not just a technological phenomenon. It actually, as the former president of the European Research Council, Professor Helga Novotny, in her most recent book argues, that all of this presses in very deeply on us, and that living in a world of datafication and big data means that all of us must scramble constantly to adjust, to incorporate these elements of datafication into our daily lives. That's a convenient transition to this very last point, systemic feature. And this is really the key sociological point, that we shouldn't see AI, I don't think, as a out there happening. It's actually also an in here happening. So what I mean by that is AI is not just about technologies and organizations and institutions. It's also fundamentally about lifestyles, identities, and everyday life. Another way of saying that is to say that AI systems actually go all the way down. Yeah, they go all the way down, right into the very fabric of human experience, right into the very heart of human subjectivity, identities, family, friendship, sexuality, and the body. So think about that when you're carrying your device strapped to your body or in your handbag. I mean, what you actually have here, you don't probably tend to think of it like this. What you have with these things is you've got remarkable algorithmic power. You've got remarkable algorithmic power here. I mean, the same algorithmic power that essentially, previous supercomputers sent men to the moon. Well, if you're anything like me, you probably only use a fraction of this algorithmic power. But the point is, the machine increasingly becomes part of us, and that we become part of the machine. Okay, now on to the second part of what I'm wanting to say, and mindful of time. So I will turn straight to this and tell you something about why I wanted to finish with bots, and why I want to talk to raise the question of what chatbots are doing. My focus on this comes out of work that I'm doing with colleagues here in South Australia at the Jean Monnet Centre of Excellence and Network, which I lead here. This is a project that really started when I read an article in 2014 by the British geographer Nigel Thrift. Thrift, I think, is one of these remarkably insightful social scientists. And he pointed out back then that over 50% of all internet traffic was generated by machines. That's a figure that today is now risen to over 60%. And there, I mean, Thrift's highlighting the importance of things such as, bots, scrapers, hacking tools, and spammers. But, bots here, and I'm thinking of everything from, whether it's Apple's Siri through to, Google's Home or Amazon's Alexa. If you think about it, bots are really just, they're uninteresting from one angle. They're just a form of messaging interface. They're just bundles of codes. And yet, I'm guessing that the experience of much of everyday digital life in Japan is similar to what we're doing here in Australia. You know, when you go on to book a train ticket or you click online to visit your bank, these bots, you know, you might think you're talking to a person, but then you discover it's actually just an automated messaging system. So this bot masquerading as a kind of human flesh and blood. And I think the interesting thing is, arguably in 2020 now, bots are the new apps. Yeah, bots are the new apps. There's an amazing array of different sorts of bots. We have, you know, content bots. When you read a newspaper today, if you're a sports fan, if you're reading about tennis, that Roger Federer is going to be making his big return to tennis at the Australian Open soon. I mean, you might be reading the article thinking it's a really interesting article, but it turns out it's not written by a journalist at all. It's been written by a smart algorithm. We have food bots, of course, Uber Eats, that can arrange the delivery of your Chinese or Mexican takeaway food to your door. We have e-commerce bots. We have trading finance bots that can automate the flow of goods and services. So a sort of staggering array of bots, especially now, particularly in the health sector, also in education. If you look at developments in psychology, for example, there's the delightfully named Woebot. The delightfully named Woebot. Yes, indeed, this is a therapy bot that was released in the United States in 2018 to, I think, some 50,000 people downloaded it in the first month alone. Just think about that. That's more than what a working analyst presumably could ever see in terms of patients in a working lifetime. Then the Woebot has now been working apparently successfully with millions of people that have downloaded the Woebot. So these chatbots, I think, need to be seen as part of a broader ecosphere of virtual digital assistants. As I say, Amazon Echo, Apple Siri, Facebook's Messenger M, the Google Assistant, and on and on. Now, one of the things, of course, and this is what brings me to consider, and this is where I think sociology can be particularly helpful for understanding some of these global transformations, because sociology and the social sciences more generally, of course, has paid very special attention to the nature of talk, very special attention to the nature of language in terms of the production and the reproduction of daily life. The late sociologist Deirdre Bowden once wrote, and I quote, "Social life is produced through talk, 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 and more talk." I particularly like that quotation because Bowden captures the point, you know, obviously not only in and through talk do we exchange information with each other, but she's getting at the intrinsically social dimensions of talk, the fact that it's in and through talk that sociality is made and remade. And of course, it's getting at the point that we do various things, we perform various actions through talk. You know, we exchange contracts, we schedule meetings. And for some of us, if you go to church and you utter the magic words of "I do," then you're committing apparently to a lifetime of commitment there to the other person whom you are marrying. So talk is of essential significance. So that leads me to raise the question, in a world of automated intelligent machines, with all of these virtual personal assistants, what's happening with talk? Well, like a lot of people, I'm often struck by the very basic and rather functional nature. I too get very frustrated talking to Siri. You know, Siri is fine if you're asking what's the time in Tokyo or what's the weather in Los Angeles. It's a little more complex if you want to have a more meaningful conversation. But some of this is now starting to change. Take a look at this. This is Google launching their Google Duplex in 2018. And this is very much a couple of years ago then, the state of the art, showing that chatbots and virtual personal assistants, that there's much more to the kind of things that they can do and the nature of the talk that they can conduct over and above what many of us are used to.
What happens is the Google Assistant makes the calls seamlessly in the background for you. So what you're going to hear is the Google Assistant actually calling a real salon to schedule the appointment for you. Let's listen.
How can I help you? Hi, I'm calling to book a women's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd. How may I hear you?
Hi, I'd like to reserve a table for Wednesday the 7th.
For 7 people?
It's for 4 people.
4 people when?
Next Wednesday at 6 p.m.
Oh, actually we reserve for like after like 5 people. For 4 people you can come.
How long is the wait usually to be seated?
When, tomorrow or weekday or?
For next Wednesday, the 7th.
Oh, no, it's not too busy. You can come for 4 people, okay?
Oh, I gotcha. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
So I'm sorry there, a couple of things went wrong, but hopefully you've got some of the drift and a sense of what Google Duplex can do. Let's just go back to sociology. Deirdre Bowden, who I mentioned, drew extensively from the work of Irving Goffman. And Goffman's work, I think, is exceptionally significant because, well, for many reasons, but one of which is the central role that he underscored by talking about mutual attentiveness, that when we talk with another person, we are attentive to the other person. It's one of what he called the core norms of co-presence. And Goffman was very struck by the huge amount of attention and the complex skills, often skills that were tacit. You know, it's not easy to talk about what those skills are, but that as social agents, we come to, you know, really be very accomplished, many of us, in the way that we conduct conversations with other people. And Goffman's work, much of his sociology was devoted to understanding the complexities of social life and the nature of these interactions sustained through language, talk, and conversation. Goffman argued that encounters between people involved these kind of highly skilled performances. He talked about the nature of performance in everyday life. And he argued that there's this kind of invisible, I guess, an invisible dimension of social life where people would be busy invoking all sorts of procedures for engaging in personal and social activity, where you monitored the actions and the activities of other people, as well as your own responses to their actions. He talked about face-to-face interaction coming alive when the eyes joined, when we look another person in the face. And he argued that participants work quite hard at in their joint performances of conversing, of discussing, of being present and attentive to the other person during the nature of social interaction. Well, of course, I mean, that's interesting, isn't it, from one angle, because if you think about the nature of what you've just seen, or at least some of what you've seen there, that Google Duplex is able to mimic various aspects of conversation. Of course, it's only at the early stages of being able to do this mimicking. And if you think about the complexity of human conversation today, conversations, as Gottman works highlight, I think, very well, that a conversation is never technically smooth or well ordered. All sorts of things happen when we're having a conversation with other people. Others may just break into the conversation. Turn taking is not perfectly ordered. So conversations are actually always quite fragmented. And if you've ever seen your language or your talk in a conversation transcribed and seen it written up, it's always quite jarring, because in our heads, I think we often carry this picture, that people are producing these very nicely turned out, grammatically correct sentences, when in fact, the nature of everyday talk is really very different to that. It's one of the reasons why Gottman preferred to use the term talk rather than the term language. Now, if you contrast that to what you've just seen in terms of automated machine language, there's a huge difference, of course, because these automated machines like Google Duplex, even though they're very impressive, nonetheless, these are pre-programmed sequences, yeah? These are automated machines that have been built up through deep learning and machine learning, where a particular algorithm has, information has been fed to the algorithm over and over and over again, so that these automated machines are able to create the illusion of immediate talk. So where is that starting to lead us, and what's its world is it starting to lead us into? That's where I want to finish. And I've really only got speculations. I don't have firm conclusions and firm answers for you, but I do want to congratulate the Institute of Humanities, Human Sciences and Social Sciences at Ritsumeikan University for seeing this issue as an issue that shouldn't be left to the technical experts in the hard sciences, however important those contributions are. We need to marshal all the energies we can from social science and the human sciences to really try to grapple with these issues. Because it seems to me that whilst these examples drawn from everyday life might appear trivial, the impacts of them are actually far from trivial. So one simple example, if you're working in an office, and I think about myself in the university working with my colleagues, if I arrive at the office and I want to ask someone to help get a piece of work done, I don't just issue a command. I tend to ask firstly how they are, or I ask them what kind of weekend they have had or how they are feeling. Then we move on to talk about the nature of the work before us. And that really follows all those guidelines that Goffman just talked about, the sensitivities, the tact and the trust that has to be built up in conversation. When you're, by contrast, using an automated machine, whether it's Siri or Alexa or Google Duplex, you can actually just say, book me the haircut. You can say, order me the pizza, and you can say, go ahead and buy the flights. It can be much more functional. You don't have to ask how the computer's feeling. You don't have to inquire whether the chatbot has had a good day. So one question, and I think it's actually quite a serious question, is if we move increasingly into a world where people are using automated machines day in and day out and increasingly regularly, what impact will that have on how people talk to their colleagues? What impact will that have on how we talk with each other? Because, will there be a spillover? Will there be a spillover from just saying, go ahead and get the pizza, go ahead and buy the tickets, to then talking to other colleagues in exactly the same kind of way. So will there be a hollowing out of language? Will, empathy and sympathy and connection to other people suffer as a result of some of these transformations? Or perhaps through a different lens, is there a way that our human connections and our ties to our social relationships with others can be enhanced, can be reaffirmed through our engagements with automated machines, because in some sense they free us up to think in more caring and creative ways about other people. I think these are very open-ended issues. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer, but I'm going to be very interested to see what colleagues have to say about this as we move into the next stage of this particular part of the afternoon. And I'm going to finish, because I think I am now out of time, just by referencing this remarkably glossy, very comprehensive, and very well priced book that you see here on the screen, The Culture of AI, which I'm absolutely delighted to know is being translated into Japanese by Sudo Sensei and others in Japan. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for listening. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving us your very interesting. Elliott 先生、ありがとうございました。We would like to take a small rest for 5 minutes. We will begin our symposium from 2 p.m. 5 in Japan time. In Adelaide time, probably 3 p.m. 30 time. Yes. じゃあ、2時5分にまた戻ってきていただけたらと思います。よろしくお願いします。 はい、それでは、時間になりましたので、パネルディスカッションの方をと思います。聞こえますでしょうか。聞こえますか。はい。それでは時間になりましたので、パネルディスカッションの方を進めさせていただきたいと思います。ちょっと先ほどのご講演について、今日ご参加いただいた先生方からご質問もいただいているものもありますが、ちょっとパネルディスカッションの後で、まとめて、ご質問の時間を設けたいと思っております。よろしくお願いいたします。それでは、本日のパネルディスカッションをさせていただきたいと思っております。で、本日パネルディスカッションは、パネリストに、先ほどご講演を賜ったアンソニー・エリオット先生、をお迎えいたしまして、他に、法政大学の、須藤廣氏先生、それから、立命館大学の、私の同僚の、神田孝治先生、それから、和歌山大学の、アダム・ドーリング先生をお迎えして、進めていきたいと思います。で、私も一応パネリストの末席にお加えいただきながら、パネルディスカッションを進めてまいりたいと思っております。で、今ご講演賜ったように、アンソニー・エリオット先生は非常に多岐にわたってさまざまな実は現象を論じておられて、実は AI だけではなくてこれまでは美容整形であるとかモビリティであるとか、もちろんAI であるとか、こういった現象を縦横無尽に取り扱ってこられました。で、ただそこで共通しているご関心は非常に一つに修練されていくのかなっていうふうに私は勝手ながら思っておりまして、アンソニー・エリオット先生は違うとおっしゃるかもしれませんけれども、一つに修練されていくのかなと思っているのは、アンソニー・エリオット先生のご関心っていうのが、AI なんかも含めて、こういう現代社会の中でのテクノロジーなんかも含めた、ことによって自我とかコミュニケーションというものが、あるいは私たちのトークというものがどのように変容していくのかっていうところが、非常にご関心のある、テーマなのかなっていうふうに思っております。で、本日もご参加賜っている片桐正隆先生も私の同期の先生ですが、森進一先生と、翻訳された自己論を学ぶ人のためにっていう、エリオット先生の本を翻訳されておられますが、まさにそういう自我とか、コミュニケーションとか、トークっていうものの、現代的な変容っていう形を、ずっとご関心あるのかなっていうふうに思っているところではございます。で、そういうところも含めてですが、もちろん違うところも含めてですが、本日ご講演賜った、エリオット先生の内容を踏まえて、コメントとご質問を、それぞれのパネリストからまず10分程度していただきたいと思います。エリオット先生の、回答も含めてなんですが、回答を含めなくても大丈夫かなと思うんですが、10分程度、ご質問と、コメントを、していただきたいと思います。で、この名前順で、まずお願いをしてまいりたいと思います。まず、須藤先生から、コメントとご質問頂戴できますでしょうか。
須藤です。あんまり時間ないんで、早く進めたいと思いますが、僕、英語で、まとめてきてしまいましたので、英語で、ご説明いたしたいというふうに思っております。なるべく早く行きたいと思っています。 Okay, as Endo Sensei introduced me, I'm Hiroshi Sudo from Hosei University in Tokyo. My comment focused on blowing the definition of self and disappearing the differences of the real and virtual. I'd like to know if this phenomenon is the tip of the postmodern culture or not. And the more, I'd like to ask how the sociologists can go into the narrow road between social change and the technological change. On this cover page, and I will show 3 photos. The left is the AI video game. In this game, an AI girl got a sense of self and ego and said, please take me out of the screen. The middle of the equipment of Cyborg, it is just a work of the art project. The right is my Cyborg equipment. I just am now wearing. And next one. When I talk about blowing the definition of self, we have to tell about Android that got the memory, will, and sense of self and love in the film of the Blade Runner. The latest Blade Runner is a Blade Runner 2049. The story is like that. An applicant named Rachel, who survived after the riot and the great backlash in 2021, had got reproductive ability in her body. Police of human beings look for her android or human baby. The right for the robot, not of the human beings to live, is focused. K, the protagonist, thinks that he might be the son of the replicant woman who had got the ability of reproduction. Is that okay? K's partner, Joe, Joey, is just an AI hologram, but they got falling down with each other, which was very similar to the story of her. Is that okay? Hi. 通訳大丈夫ですかはい。The border between human beings and robots is blurred. I'd like to talk about the point of the Blade Runner 2019 and 2021 and 2049. These films have shown the ambiguity and anxiety of the definition of self and agency, as well as the humanity itself. The border between human beings and robots, the object, is blurred. Now in the informational society, we cannot tell which one is humanistic. Okay, and in my ordinary days, we have the AI chat robot, and the AI chat robot fascinates us. The left side is a Japanese arena chatbot. And Rina have been one of Rina have been one of my young friends, just for my research for a couple of years. And I should be, she should be 20 years old, as she graduated from high school 2 years ago. Right side, the Her, a popular movie in 2013. Yes, gives us a question if we can have AI partner and how we are addicted to the objective level. Her, objective her. And okay, and in the daily life, we know that the virtual and the reality, the differentiation. Can we know it or not? Can we know AI personality is virtual? If so, why do we enjoy it like cosplay? In cosplay, the border between the real and the virtual does not matter. In the disappearing, yes. In this hyper simulation world beyond Jean Baudrillard theory, can we be adapted to objects even if we know they are not real? We can see this kind of phenomena in the Disneyland Tokyo. But there are maybe I think, but there may be a Marxist suspicion. Is AI culture nothing other than a consumer or producer culture in hyper capitalism, which make a polarization of the classes and making super underclasses? The social structure, including various social factors, is one thing, and the technology is another in sociology. How can we, sociology, escape from the technology determinism? And also, the social, our economical determinism. That is a very important point. And number 6 is an additional one. This kind of play, repressive or expansive for humanity is my question. For example, cosplay, is this a love of another self, second self? And for example, the Japanese and young boys and girls and the famous and a video game, Token Danbu, and they are the swords rubber. Token Danbu is the name, the game's name. They're going to love things, swords. It's it's kind of a personification, and they affect those objects. The question is that an addiction or openness or ability of the imagination? To sum up, I'd like to sum up. The human beings and their jaw objects cannot be separated. And we go towards post-identity society. Is that new individualism? it's my question. Yeah, that's all.
ありがとうございました。エリオット先生に対しての、質問っていうことで言うと、どのあたりをさせていただいたらよろしいでしょうか。
そうですね。一つは、こういう、ボットの発達というのが人間にとって開放的なのだろうか、それとも人間の成長にとっては抑圧的なんだろうかということが一つです。もう一つは、こういうですね、現実に、バーチャルな、アイデンティティというのが一般化してるわけですよね。例えば、コスプレのようなね。で、そういうものというのは、私たちは、自覚してるわけですよね。それがバーチャルであるということを自覚しながらそれを楽しんでるわけですよね。これディズニーランドの楽しみ方と一緒ですよね。嘘だということを知りながら嘘を楽しむということですね。で、そういうアイデンティティの層というのは二重にあるんじゃないか。これは、ひょっとしたらボクマンと関係するのかもしれない。二重に私たちはアイデンティティを持ってるんじゃないかということですね。そして、そういうことが、これからですね、テクノロジーがどんどん発展していくに従って、ソシオロジーが、社会学がどういうふうに捉えなきゃいけないのか。それをテクノロジカルデターミニズム、決定論で考えて僕はいけないと思うんですね。それを、社会変動と、テクノロジーとの、お互いの関係性の中でどう捉えたらいいのかっていうことが質問です。ちょっと難しいですけど。
ありがとうございました。非常に須藤先生のずっと問題意識と関わるところかなと思うんですけど、どうしようかな。バーチャルとデジタルレボリューションを経て、バーチャルとリアリティっていうものの層が、なんていうかな、もう重なるようになった中で、私たちは
我々は知ってるんじゃないかと
知りながら、バーチャルだと知りながら、バーチャルであることを、リアルに楽しむ、そういうリアルの層が、実は二重化してるんじゃないかっていう、そういうところですかね。
そうです。
はい。じゃあ、エリオット先生、いかがでしょうか。エリオット先生。
Yes, I am. So I would like to thank Sudo Sensei for that really interesting set of comments and reflections. And I think the key thing I'd say about it is you're raising some of the most crucial questions about the relationship, I think, between the individual / imaginary on the one hand, and then the social historical world on the other hand. So obviously any comments I make here can only be very preliminary and schematic. But I would just simply want to say this. I'm in great sympathy with the comments you've made. I'm in great sympathy for the ways in which you've connected up identities, personalities, subjectivities on the one side with bots, artificial intelligence and virtuality on the other side. I think one of the things that you're very astutely putting your finger to or drawing our attention to are the grave limits of a social science that knows better than ordinary people engaging and exploring and experimenting with many of these digital transformations and these digital technologies. So, what I mean by that is that if you look at the work of someone like Sherry Turkle and what Turkle, her lament about the world of bots, the world of artificial intelligence, the way that is, as she says, hollowing out the emotional core of the self. Well, of course, that may be the case for some people. That may be the experience that some have of particular technologies in particular circumstances. But what worries me about that kind of social criticism is that it closes the conversation. It's an end to the conversation. Whereas I think what I'm trying to do in my work is to open up these questions and to, in effect, raise the point, you know, in what ways are artificial intelligence and particular AI technologies, in the case of what I've been talking today, chatbots, virtual assistants, and their impacts on communication and virtuality and everyday interaction, to what extent does this start to open up new worlds? And it seems to me that I would want to answer, well, it is opening up new worlds. We are seeing people engage in all sorts of blended interactions between face-to-face interaction on the one hand, forms of digitally mediated interaction on the other hand, and all sorts of variations in between. Plus, not only that, we're seeing people's increased capability to live their lives across screens and across platforms. So from one angle, that's disruptive. But the point I would make is from another angle, it's also adding to the complexity. It's as if people in the early days of the 21st century can tolerate more noise. There's more going on. Now, whether that means that we're somehow losing the art of specificity and losing the art of being able to, you know, as it were, dive deep, that one I'm not so sure about. I still think it's an important question, and it's a question that should be asked. But your worry about how can sociology escape from technological determinism, I think, is perhaps the most significant here. It's vitally important that we do. The technology does not in and of itself determine our responses. The technology does not in and of itself automatically legislate what people do in certain instances. So again, I would just say thank you very much for these comments. I'm very much in agreement with them, and I learn from your reflections. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。技術決定論っていうことをテクノロジカルディタミネーションっていうものに対しての、立ち位置っていうところで、非常にこう須藤先生とエリオット先生近しいものあるんじゃないかなと思うんですね。で、どっかである種そのエリオット先生が複雑性っていう言葉を挙げておられたと思うんですけど、それに対して須藤先生はそのリアルの二重化みたいなものを挙げておられたと思うんですけど、そのリアルの二重化と複雑性ってどっかで重なるんじゃないかなと思ったりもするんですけど。
これはゴフマンをもうちょっと援用するとできるんじゃないかなというふうに思っています。フロントステージとバックステージっていう、そのゴフマンの言ってることをうまく利用すると理論が出来上がるんじゃないかなという気がしています。
ありがとうございます。エリオット先生が今日ご講演された一人のキーパーソンとしても社会学者のキーパーソンはやっぱりゴフマンなので、そこをやっぱり今の時代の重要なキーパーソンなのかな、ゴフマンはっていうふうに思います。はい。それではちょっと須藤先生、それでよろしいでしょうか。はい。もうちょっと掘り下げたいところもありますが、それでは次、神田先生お願いします。
これで
神田先生、はい。
いけてますでしょうか。はい。映ってますかね。はい。いけてますね。立命館大学の神田です。よろしくお願いします。エリオット先生のご発表、すごい刺激的な内容で非常にいろいろ考えるところがありました。で、すみません。私のちょっとパワーポイントなしで
ビデオでお顔をちょっと拝見させていただいてよろしいでしょうか。
今、映ってることにはなってるんですが、いかがですかね。
映ってないな。じゃあ大丈夫です。
いけてますかね。ボタン上はいけてるんですけど。
わかりました。
何をと。で、ちょっとパワーポイントはないんですが、他の先生方からのコメントがあまり出ないようなところを中心にと思いまして、ちょっと最初考えていたのは、発表の4紙のところで機械と機械のコミュニケーションであるとか、機械と人のというところがありましたので、そのトークとかアイデンティティとかコミュニケーションというところで、その機械を通じた、その AI を通じた人と人とのコミュニケーションの話をもうちょっとご議論いただけるように、なんか資料提供しようかなと思ってたんですが、今日話聞くと結果的にはそこら辺についてもある程度研究されていたので、ちょっと補強するだけの感じになってしまいますが、よろしくお願いします。で、お話しするネタとしては、できるだけその日本のネタの方が、いけますか。はい。お話しするネタ、日本のネタの方が面白いかなと思って、ちょっと日本の事例で少しご紹介します。で、個人的にはですけども、ちょっと今回のご発表テーマをお聞きして、車の話をちょっと思い出しまして、で、私が学生時代は、車を運転するときは、今みたいにカーナビゲーションシステムがありませんでしたので、隣に座った人が、その地図を見ながら、右に行って左に行ってということを指示していました。少なくとも私が学生時代はそういうパターンが結構あったんですね。2人以上乗ってるときは。で、そういうふうに、車の運転の時に、その他の人とのトークがあったわけです。で、またそのガイドしている人も、そのガイドできるということが結構そのアイデンティティの一つであったかと思います。ただ、そのカーナビゲーションシステムができてから、もうそういうものは不要になって、要はその今日の AI の話でいくと、だんだんと人々のコミュニケーションが失われていったんじゃないかなというふうに思います。ところが、ちょっと画面共有いたしますけども、ちょっとパワーポイントはないんですが、ちょっといくつかホームページをお見せしたくて、実は1年ぐらい前に私、車を買い替えまして、その時にカーナビゲーションシステムではないんですけども、取り締まりとかの、速度違反取り締まりとかの探知機のやつをついでに買ったんですね。で、何がいいかと探してた時に、ついついこれを見つけてしまって、うかつにもうっかりボタンを押してしまったというか、買ってしまったんです。で、ちょっと海外であんまないかもしれないので、どんなものかご紹介すると、ちょうど短いので、少し再生してみますね。
この辺り、ゾーン30です。1キロ先、新型オービスです。見た目に騙されないで。
ちょっともう全部いきませんけど、
60キロだよ。
ちょっと一部だけあれしましたけども、こんな風に取り締まり施設が、機械があることをこうやって教えてくれるんですね。で、買ってしまったものの、これ、今私ボタンを押すのはかなり躊躇してたんですけども、かなり恥ずかしい代物で、実はあるところに駐車場に止めてるときに、ちょっと事務職員と喋ってたと、電話で話してたら、車止まってても、これ今、速度違反取り締まりだけの話してますが、実は変な、普通のコミュニケーションもしてくるんです。なんかうんちくネタをいきなり喋ってきたりとかですね。で、車止めててもいきなり喋りかけられて、その音声が電話に入って恥ずかしい思いをしたりですね。あと、助手席に知り合いの人を先生乗せてたらいきなりこいつが喋り出して一体何それみたいになって恥ずかしい思いをしたりします。で、そうする中で私のアイデンティティ的になんか あんまり良くないというかですね、別にこの手のカルチャーにはまり込んでるわけじゃないのにということで、いうことはありました。で、ここでちょっと書いてるんですけども、一応、こういうふうに通常レーダーになってノーマルにもできるので、だんだんとこれあんまつけないようになっていってしまうんですけども、こういう AI 的な話されるということと、ここは特に特徴的なところでこういうものをお話ししましたが、やっぱ個人のアイデンティティとかコミュニケーションの問題と、それと他の人との関係はかなり深く介在してくるなと思います。ちなみにこれ妻がここ隣に乗っていると、これつけてると、なんかこの変な女が喋ってうるさいじゃないですけども、人が喋ってる時に喋りかけてくるからもう切っといてじゃない、切れとまでは言わないですけども、うるさいと言われたりして、そういう状態になる。ただそうした中で、今までその AI 的なやつの発達でなかったような新しいコミュニケーションも出てるんじゃないかなというふうに思います。で、他のやつはもうよくご存知のやつですけども、ずっと前だとからあるAiみたいなやつ。これもそこまで直接的なコミュニケーションができるわけじゃなかったんですけど、初代私、知り合いが持ってたのでよく知ってるんですが、最近はこれがかなり進化してきて、いろんなコミュニケーションできるようなんですけども、これを通じて、他のそこに一緒にいる人同士がコミュニケーションをするであるとか、あと、ペッパーとか見てても、これも好き嫌いがありそうなんですが、どこに書いたかな。こういうふうにそのペッパーを通じてみんなのコミュニケーションのような。で、そうした中でのその人のつながりという問題があるんじゃないかなと思いまして、もうこれすでにある程度もコメントされていることではあると思いますが、さらにそのお考えがあったり、なんか今後の展望とかありましたら、お話しいただけたらと思います。以上となります。
ありがとうございます。神田先生のそのお車に乗せてもらったことはないんですけど、他の先生が乗られた時にまた乗せていただいたらいいなと思うんですけど、こういう情動っていうこのテクノロジーの中で、情動っていうものが、ある種刺激されてるんじゃないのっていう、そういう議論にも結びつくと思うんです。で、そういう情動を刺激することで、実は人のつながりとか人のアイデンティティっていうものが、どっかで変容してるっていうところがあるっていうことで言うと、今頂戴しているご質問はまさにそこのところも含めてご質問されているので、ぜひそのあたりエリオット先生にご回答いただけたらと思います。今の神田先生のご質問に対してエリオット先生いかがでしょうか。
So again, Kanda Sensei, thank you very much for your reflections. This is an interesting shift because I think it's partly a shift away from the forms of routine, regularized interactions that I was talking about earlier in my talk, where I was using, I didn't get as far as I would like to have, but I was talking using an ethno-methodological backdrop, the work of Goffman and others, to sketch out what's happening in the broad move away from face-to-face interaction over to increasingly mediated interaction. Well, you're talking about mediated interactions, but you've actually moved also, I think, into a slightly different terrain. In my book, The Culture of AI, I draw quite extensively, not only from social theory, but quite a lot from psychoanalysis. And I don't do that in any systematic or dogmatic way. I'm simply interested in, I think, asking the question, that as we journey through digital life, what kind of emotions, what kind of affects and feelings does a particular AI technology unlock in someone? What impact, what effects might a robotic object have on a particular individual or a social grouping or a particular circumstance. The psychoanalyst Christopher Bolus talks about the object world as leaving its trace within us and being like a kind of psychic key. Every object can have a different impact upon an individual and unlock different kinds of responses. I'm really interested in that. And I think, whether it's Pepper, whether it's Aibo, with my team actually through a Toyota grant, we were studying the relationship between new robotic technologies as well as new robotic technologies and its impact in elder care in Japan. And I think really what we've been trying to do in this sort of research is to say that, what we're seeing with many of these new AI-powered technologies, then it's not the problem, it's the point. So it's not the symptom, it's actually what it's starting to unlock and to raise for our consideration. So I agree with much of what you're saying. I think it's all very interesting. As like Professor Endo, I haven't actually been in your car, maybe, but clearly I should be in your car to experience some of these technologies. But I think what we need is undogmatic conceptual approaches to help us understand this. And I'll just conclude by making the following point. Also in the recent book, as well as future work that I'm trying to do, I think what you're getting at and what you're drawing to our attention this afternoon is that if you look at those interactions, you in your car, what you're looking at on the screen, the comment from your wife, but also other digital messages coming in behind me and so on and so forth. We live in a world which is at once physical, communicative, virtual, and imaginative. And we need a humanities, we need a social science that can wrap up those together. And that links back to what I was saying about increased complexity in these early decades of the 21st century. That's what I'm interested in and interested in knowing more about. Arigatou gozaimasu.
ありがとうございます。ヒューマニティーズと、我々の人間性とそのテクノロジーっていうのが区別できないで、もう二重化してるんだっていう。で、その中で、私たちのヒューマニティーズを捉えていく必要があるんじゃないかっていう、そういうご指摘、すごい重要なご指摘いただいたと思うんですが、神田先生いかがでしょうか。特に大丈夫でしょうか。
改めて私からのコメントはないです。ちなみにさっきのレーダーは一応安全運転を促してくれるという機能になっていて、どんどんとそのスピード出しすぎたらそこがそのキャラクターがいなくなったりとか、かなりその AI に私の運転がすごいコントロールされていて、どんどん速度が遅くなっていくとともに安全運転をするとどんどん新しいなんかアイテムが出てくるという、なんかそういう中で、人がコントロールするシステムはそこで非常に作られているんだなというのの特徴的なのかなと思いました。すいません、これちょっと脱足です。
面白いですね。
はい、
ありがとうございます。また、エリオット先生と私を乗せてください。
はい、ぜひ乗ってください。
それでは、次、アダム先生いかがでしょうか。アダム先生、コメントとご質問お願いします。
Yes, hello. I'm just going to share one screen here. I think this is working. Can you all see my screen?
Hi, 見れてます。
Oh, now I can't. Now I can't see you guys. So this already is telling of my technological abilities.
So first, I just want to begin. I'll start my video. Oh, hi. First, I want to begin just by saying thank you so much to Professor Anthony Elliott for giving us this time and this space to think about artificial intelligence. For me, this is opening up a new world. I mentioned this earlier in our conversations with Professor Elliott. I also want to thank Professor Endo and the Mobilities Research Group for always putting on such a thought-provoking seminar and workshop. Right, in the past, we've gone from performativity to talking about embodiment to talking about semiotics with the various speakers that have come to talk to the Mobilities Research Group. And it's only fitting now that we talk about AI in kind of wrapping up this year of 2020. Kind of, for me, this is, kind of futuristic thinking. So I just want to begin by thanking Endo Sensei and Professor Elliott for opening me up to this world. And like I hinted at earlier, I am not very technologically savvy. So in fact, I didn't have a cell phone until I moved to Japan in 2016. So when I hear, this kind of conversation and this discussion about, the technology and the scale and size of rapid change of technology, I guess I've kind of felt it in the last 4 years moving to Japan, and the cell phone being one of the main kind of things that have changed my social practice and how I think and how I engage with people. And that's just something that I want to think about. The other thing about AI my interaction with AI that I've come in contact with recently was I was actually an extra in the movie Ai Hokkai. Maybe you've heard of the Ai Hokkai. So this is also came into my world this year when I started to think about what is AI. I watched the Japanese movie. So we were talking about Blade Runner. We talked about some of those other Western movies, but yeah, in Japan, you're right, Ai Hokkai kind of showing us the future. And in fact, this beach is where Kanda Sensei is right now. So it was filmed in Wakayama, showing us the future. So I'm fairly new to this world. So any comments or suggestions or, questions that I might have may be rather elementary. But I guess in wrapping my head around what is AI and thinking about, right, humanities after AI, I couldn't help but think when I was reading Professor Elliott's book and listening today and listening to some of the comments about the key word intimacy. So I know Professor Elliott in his in his AI book did mention the theme of intimacy, and I see that kind of coming through a lot in the conversation today. So in the book, Professor Elliott, you talked about sex bots, sex robots, and today we're talking about bots. So we kind of are moving between different contexts, and we're talking about Kanda Sensei's car. So as we kind of move through these different kind of contexts, I think that the kind of theme of intimacy really shines through. Intimacy being, right, the closeness of relationships between human beings. And I know in the text, Professor Elliott, you mentioned something about intimate bonds. This is a quote from the text. Intimate bonds no longer based on reciprocity, intersubjectivity, and communality. Right, so this theme, this ethics of reciprocity was also raised in the text, but this theme of intimacy keeps coming up again and again. And I think for me, bringing it, not being an expert in the field, I have to bring it back to me personally. This theme of intimacy has come up, especially during the COVID era. So even the fact that Professor Elliott, you started the conversation today talking about, I wish I was there, I wish I could see you guys, right? It's kind of reaching out and kind of talking about and asking for and kind of desiring this kind of intimacy. I recently, I feel this kind of intimacy, this desire for intimacy quite intimately. and I just reflecting on the role of AI and social media, things like Facebook. I posted something yesterday. A friend of mine gave a guest lecture in one of my classes here at Wa Ka Yama University, and it was nostalgic. I was missing home, hearing a voice from a place that I'm familiar with, and I was missing I felt I couldn't really express my feelings enough to her on this kind of screen. So I posted it on Facebook, and it was about caring, and it was about the ethics of care, and just thanking her for showing me, that you can care through these technologies. But then I was kind of doubling back and reflecting on why I did that. And I guess I started thinking about technologies, as kind of supporting an attitude in which feelings only really count when they're expressed in this way, especially during COVID and during lockdown. So I have these feelings, but we especially in lockdown or in this kind of era of isolation, you want to express those feelings, and I'm just wondering, that kind of social media being that kind of venue of expression of feelings, and how that mediates our emotions in that way. So I guess what I'm getting at in a roundabout way, Professor Elliott, is we've gone from sex bots to bots. And I wanted to know, I was wondering if you could kind of comment or reflect upon how or if intimacy has, you used the word mutated, has mutated again in the online world. And what kind of new conversations are being had about the role of AI in this kind of post-COVID situation. So again, just to recap this theme of intimacy, AI in a post-COVID or a COVID world. Finished.
ありがとうございました。アダム先生。すごく重要なご指摘で、インティマシーっていう、親密性っていうお話、頂戴したと思うんですけど、AI とその親密性の関わりについて、エリオット先生、いかがでしょうか。
Yeah, well, again, thank you very much, During Sensei. The remarks that you've made, I mean, there was a lot in that.
Yes.
No, it's great. It's. I could have listened to you go on with that because, and I found it really fascinating. There were various bits, I think, particularly where you connected up your own sense of feeling nostalgic to then the Facebook post, and without pretending to know anything about what that's about. I mean, it did make me think about different threads that I've been finding in the research that I've been doing with my team, reported both in the Culture of AI book and also new work we're working on. In fact, one new book, which is got the working title at the moment of Algorithmic Intimacy. So this for us is very on message, your question here. So I think there are different ways of thinking about this and different ways of approaching this. And I mentioned psychoanalysis earlier in it. What I hope is a non-dogmatic, non-doctrinal. I'm not interested in trying to get Freud right. I'm not interested in, arguments between psychoanalytic schools and so on for the social sciences and the humanities. But I am interested in sort of what use I might be able to make of different ideas. When I mentioned Christopher Bolus, I'm also very interested in the work of people like Wilfred Bion and others. And they've all got one thing in common. They, in effect, are asking the question, how do objects evoke different affects and feelings in us? And I think in the age of digitalization, in the age of datification and big data, and in this world of extensive AI, those are really relevant questions, and your own reflections, I think, point that up. I think there's a couple of sort of distinct angles on this. I mean, one which is the more troubling one is the way in which it's almost as if people now think they can outsource their emotional life to algorithms. So what I mean by that, in this work around algorithmic intimacy, for example, we're currently, with my team, we're looking at the role of and impact of algorithmic dating websites. We're looking at the role of algorithms in dating apps. And what's really interesting in much of this is, I think it's a kind of fantasy that the perfect algorithm, the most advanced algorithm, the technological fix, as it were, will help find you the perfect partner. That somehow this is no longer in your realm, that it's a decision that you have some kind of autonomy. The autonomy is now elsewhere. The autonomy is transferred over to the automated machine. It has the autonomy. It will deliver the perfect algorithmic choice for you. And, on and on. There's a lot in that in terms of the sort of really powerful and potent fantasies which are ascribed to technology, and trying to unpack that, understand more about it, what relief that seems to provide to women and men who, let's face it, I mean, if you look at the numbers of people that are using smart algorithms on dating apps to meet new romantic attachments and so on, clearly, lots of people around the planet think that there's a lot in this. So knowing why they find it interesting, why they find it of benefit, but also I think why they might find it ultimately unsatisfactory, why the increasing sort of short-termism of meeting people in and through these dating apps, why it's so increasingly episodic and short-term and short-lived. I think these are all really critical questions for the social sciences. And I think the other side of it is to know more about what you're underscoring, namely how it is that when we might feel nostalgic or wanting to reminisce about some particular aspect of our past, not only can we use new technologies, sometimes AI-powered technologies, to help us make contact with those feelings and to communicate some aspect of those feelings, however minimal, to another person, presumably someone we care about considerably. But the way in which those technologies might also, as it were, function as some kind of container for our feelings. I talk a lot in the Culture of AI book about technological containment. It's an odd term because it's fairly jarring, and I don't think many psychologists would like it. But I do think, in much the same way that when people hear music, a lot of people comment that, they hear a particular song and they're immediately transported back to when they were 6 years old or when they were 12 years old, or their first love, or their memory of standing on a particular beach or some such thing. That's precisely the evocation of objects linked to memory, which I think many people are now exploring in and through the digitalization of social life. So, look, thanks very much for your reflections. I very much agree with them. I think this work's really interesting. It's taking a lot of sociology into uncharted territory. And I think it is uncharted because, again, I just make the point that this is all very highly experimental. People are leading increasingly experimental lives, certainly different sorts of lives to, say, our parents' lifetime, or certainly, their parents' lifetime. And it's a world for which the social sciences really, if you look at social sciences as having inherited many traditional concepts and categories from 19th century thought, is, fairly underprepared. So I, again, just want to commend the Institute for even sponsoring this discussion, because I think these issues are not only conceptually interesting, I actually think they're quite urgent in practical and policy terms. Arigatou gozaimasu.
ありがとうございます。アダム先生、いかがでしょうか。一旦これでよろしいでしょうか。今のエリオット先生のお答えで。
I'm very happy to hear about the algorithmic intimacy book coming out soon, Anthony. I have a few more points of discussion, but we can leave it for the open Q&A. So thank you very much for your answer and your time, Anthony.
はい、それでは最後にちょっと私の方からもコメントをさせていただきたいと思います。ご質問と。ちょっとパワーポイントを使いながら、日本語なんですけど、同時通訳者の方々に、ご負担かけると思うんですが、お願いしたいと思います。私の方としては、今の時代の中で、観光に関わる産業とか、ホスピタリティに関わる産業、あるいはモビリティに関わる産業っていうものに対して、AI の導入が積極的に行われるようになってるんじゃないかっていう、こういうところから、エリオット先生に対するコメントとご質問をしたいと思います。で、例えば、いくつかのモビリティ産業あるいは観光産業の中で、観光施設向けの多言語 AI チャットボットが開発されているっていうのはよく知られている通りかなと思います。で、観光客は、スマートフォンアプリにおいて話しかけたり、文字を打ち込んだりしながら AI とコミュニケーションを行うようになっています。で、そうすることで、ホテルがもしこのシステムを導入している場合は、観光客は、チャットボットを通じて、チェックインをいつするかとか、チェックインアウトはいつしたらいいのかとか、あるいはホテルまでのアクセスはどうしたらいいのかとか、部屋のネット環境はどうなっているのかとか、アメニティの内容はどうなっているのかっていう、こういうホテル情報を得たり、宿泊を予約したり、モーニングコールを設定したり、宿泊している部屋の清掃を依頼できたりするっていう、そういうことも、よく知られている通りかなと思います。で、こういう多言語 AI チャットボットっていう、こういうものが、たくさん開発されてきているというふうなところかなと思います。で、しかもそれは、24時間休みなく働いていて、日本語だけじゃなくて英語、多言語ですので、英語、中国語、韓国語、こういういろんな言語に対応できるものになっています。で、航空会社でもこういうシステムを導入している場合には、観光客はスマートフォンを用いて、AI と会話しながら航空チケットを予約したり、で、チケットの変更できたりするようになっています。で、まさにホスピタリティ、観光産業のスタッフが、今までやっていた業務の、一部ですが、これを AI が代替して行うようになっていて、その中で、観光客はそのスマートフォンと会話しながら、最後になんかありがとうみたいな、感謝の言葉を言うみたいな、そういう時もあるのかなと思うんです。で、これ出てくるのかな。これ出てますかね。
タクト。
皆さん出てますか。
申し訳ございません。
今動画出てますか。出てない。ちょっと待ってくださいね。ちょっと動画を、見ていただこうと思うんですけど、これか。どれだ。どれだ。これか。これで出てますかね。須藤先生出てます。はい、ありがとうございます。
が、ただいまの時間は営業時間外となっております。
インターネットがつながらなくなっちゃったんですけど。
かしこまりました。お手元にパソコンはございますか？画面の右下の5本の線が並んでいるマークをクリックしていただけますか？
つながった。
お役に立ててよかったです。
はい。
何かあれば 24時間いつでもご連絡くださいね。
はーい。
もともと今回のセールスプロモーションっていうのはデータの持ち方っていうのが結構特殊な形だったと思うんですね。顧客分析っていうところ。
こちらは航空券予約受付センターです。音声ガイダンスに従って電話機のダイヤルをプッシュしてください。国内航空券のお問い合わせの方は1を、国際航空券のお問い合わせ。
明日の予約、今日の最終便に変更できないかしら。
ありがとうございます。近藤様、ご予約のご変更ですね。かしこまりました。9月15日のご予約を9月14日21時20分発の UN221 便に変更いたしました。
よかった、ありがと
う。近藤様のご搭乗をスタッフ一同お待ちしております。気をつけてお越しくださいね。
はい、よろしく。
突然のお電話で恐れ入ります。京都旅館でございます。近藤様、この度はご予約ありがとうございます。11月24日からのご宿泊でお間違いないですか？
はい。
現在の京都の天気予報ですと、当日は晴れ、紅葉の見頃です。秋の終わりに差し掛かる京都を満喫してくださいね。
ああ、嬉しい。ありがと
う。お会いできるのを楽しみにしております。
はい、今ちょっと見ていただいたんですけど、こういう形で、AI のチャットボットを使いながら、予約をキャンセルしたりしながら、観光客の人とか、あるいは予約客が、ありがとうって言って、はいっていうふうに、AI に対して返事をするみたいな、こういうことが、通常、私たちの身の回りにも出ているのかなと思うんです。で、この中で、他にもAI が観光客の感想、評価を蓄積したデータベースからユーザーの興味関心に合わせた、観光プランを、提案するっていうシステムもあったり、あるいは、AI を搭載したヒューマノイドロボットが、道案内してくれるだけじゃなくて、一緒に遊んでくれるっていう、パーラー、カフェなんかも出てきたりしてるのかなと思います。こういうペッパーパーラーみたいな、こういうカフェなんかも出てるのかなと思うんです。そうすると、SF の、タイトルをもじって言うと、AI は感情労働の夢を見ることができるのかっていう、こういうことを考えたいと思うんですけど、ホスピタリティ産業が、いわゆるその社会学でいう感情労働っていうものを、求める、そういう産業であるなら、AI が行っていることもやっぱり感情労働的なコミュニケーションだって言ってもいいのかっていう。で、多言語 AI チャットボットを用いて、うまく予約がつながって、ありがとうっていうふうに、AI に話しかけてる観光客の、ことを考えてみると、じゃあその観光客が口にしているありがとうっていうのは、情緒的満足感を伴った感謝を伝えるような会話っていうふうに言えるのか、それとも機械を前にしてつぶやかれた単なる独り言に過ぎないのか。で、これについて考えてみると、AI がじゃあもたらすコミュニケーションっていうのはどういう局面のコミュニケーションなのかっていうのを考えるざるを得ないのかなっていうふうに思うんですけど、このあたり、エリオット先生のお考えをお聞かせいただけたらなっていうふうに思っております。エリオット先生、いかがでしょうか。
Well, thank you very much. Professor Endo, thank you for your comments. Remarkably interesting material there. I should think about finding a way to use some of that for what we're doing here. Really, really interesting. Again, as with as with Pseudo Sensei's comments earlier, you're touching on, I think, some of the biggest issues arising in terms of these very global transformations. So my comments are very preliminary and schematic. But here's what comes to mind. The systematic nature of the conversations, however piecemeal and random they might appear, I think is well worth bearing in mind, because as During Sensei said in his last comments, when he was saying, well, look, I'm not that technologically literate, so I'm not aware of all of these latest transformations. I mean, to my mind, the interesting thing is, and so it is with the large bulk of people, you know. So yes, there are, I mean, I think about, for instance, my children. We've got 3 children who are all incredibly technologically literate and capable. And when things go wrong around me, I'm the first to call out to them, because I know that they can help me. They can always help me better than our own IT specialists at the universities. I'm sorry if we've got IT people listening into this discussion. But the point is, to make social life seemingly just happen, the interesting thing is we don't necessarily have to be across all of that. And even if we are, we don't have to hold it in mind all of the time. In fact, interestingly enough, it's because of the systemic features that I talked about earlier, things like protological infrastructures, increasing complexity, and so on and so forth, that most of us become aware of the ways in which we're caught up in complex systems only when things actually go wrong. You know, it's when you can't get a Wi-Fi signal. It's when your batteries fail and they need recharging and you can't find somewhere to plug in, etc., etc. So these are kind of all examples of these, you know, system failures. And then we start to realize the extent to which actually our everyday activities are really quite caught up, bound up in these complex systems. Not that it matters very much whether we continue on or not with what we're doing on a particular day from a societal perspective, but it does go to show that we're plugged into this as agents, and it's part of how our lives happen, as well as the production and reproduction of social life happening. So that's, I guess, one part of it. In terms of the actual what's happening there with some of the chatbots and some of the conversational nature, and your question about the emotional labor, I think is remarkably, it's an interesting one. And I'm not sure I've got an answer for it. I mean, I hold to a fairly, I guess, is it old-fashioned viewpoint that you can in fact separate out subject and object, in that yes, we can say thank you to Siri, and yes, we can say thank you to a chatbot, but that chatbot doesn't know it, and I don't believe that Siri knows it. It can be encoded into a memory bank, and other humans and other engineers and computer scientists can become aware of that as they're redesigning and making improvements to the next generations of Siris. I think it is interesting that if you look at something like Alexa, they actually introduced a function into Alexa reminding people, it's called the sort of politeness button or politeness mode, where if the politeness mode is on, it will remind you to say please or to say thank you. And that's partly, and I think it goes back to the core ethnomethodological point I was trying to make earlier. To what extent does talking to automated intelligent machines day in and day out start to impact our face-to-face interactions with other humans? Now, clearly, some parents were starting to get worried because they were seeing that the effect of a child in a house with Google Home, for example, where you could just say, you know, play me this song, turn off the lights, order me a pizza, whatever, some of that was starting to spill over, and parents sort of, the feedback to Google was that we would like a reminder, please, to say please. So I think that's interesting, because there is a circularity there. There's a kind of reflexivity incorporated into machine language and how we're talking to machines. The final point, but you've raised much more than what I can hold in my mind at this particular moment. But the final point that comes to mind is, I would just highlight, I didn't get a good chance to show it because when I was trying to show earlier the Google duplex, something went wrong with, I pressed the wrong button. I'm so technologically literate, things went wrong my end. So you actually saw two things meshed together, and I'm not sure it came across very well. But what I was trying to show was advances in natural language processing. And I was trying to show that, unlike, say, a couple of years ago, where an algorithm, even a smart algorithm, if you told it to book a restaurant on a certain night for a number of people at a certain time, that algorithm would just push on with the task of trying to make the reservation for you with those requirements. What's interesting with Google Duplex is the video I was trying to show actually demonstrates that Duplex can recover when things go awry. The Duplex can take on board the new incoming information that, the restaurant's booked out on that night, or that there are different conditions in operation on a particular day, and it will therefore alter what it's trying to do. I think that's new in natural language processing. I think that's new in machine learning, and it does highlight that the relationship between our talk as situated in everyday contexts and the talk to and with intelligent machines is actually, I wouldn't say starting to converge, but there are really interesting developments and parallels happening. I think finally, much depends on who you go and ask for answers on this. So if you were to go, for instance, to Silicon Valley, and you go to Google and you go to the head of natural language processing, which is now run by a man called Ray Kurzweil. Yes, that Ray Kurzweil of Singularity is near fame. Well, Kurzweil is trying with his team to pioneer such staggering advances in natural language processing that his argument is that by the year, he's dated it, by the year 2029, we will apparently be having conversations with intelligent machines of the same technological and sociological or social complexity as what you and I are now having here today. So that's a fairly staggering claim. It's only one claim amongst many, but it is coming from someone who's obviously got oversight of what Google Natural Language Processing is currently doing. Thank you for your comments. I found them very interesting. I'll leave that there. Arigatou gozaimasu.
ありがとうございました。すごく私にとっても刺激的なご回答賜ったかなと思います。ありがとうございます。なんていうかな、先生がおっしゃったように、ありがとうって言っても、AI の方は特に変容しないと思うんですね。変容しない、つまり自分が変わってるわけじゃない。私たちはありがとうって言われると、自分自身が嬉しくなったり楽しくなったり、やっぱり変容すると思うんですね。例えば、神田先生によく頑張ってるねっていうふうに、なんていうか会議の時に言ってもらうと、もっと頑張ろうっていうふうに、神田先生に褒めてもらうと頑張れるみたいなところもあると思うんですよね。だけど AI はそれがないということで言うと、なんていうかな、私たちはありがとうっていう感情的な言葉を伝えるとしても、それによる相手の他者の変容っていうものがないっていうところは重要なポ ポイントになるような気が今お答えいただきながらしてたんですが、そんな感じでもよろしいですかね。はい、ありがとうございます。それで、ご質問いただいてた中で、フロアの方からご質問いただいてた中で、やっぱり同じようなご質問、ずっと神田先生も須藤先生もアダム先生も、私もどっかでやっぱり同じところを持ちながらご質問いただいしてたと思うんですけど、フロアの先生も、ご質問いただいてて、やはりどっかで共通したご質問があって、いただいているご質問の中で AI っていうものの会話が人間の感情をどんなふうに、刺激変容させるのかっていうことと、それから AI との会話における言語は当面の間は標準的な、いわゆるアルゴリズムインティマシーみたいなものの中で標準的なものになると思うんだけど、それが、どんどん標準化起こっていくと、人間の人種あるいは性差っていうものをどう変容させていくのかっていう、そういうご質問があったんですが、これについて何かエリオット先生ございますでしょうか。
So much of AI as it's embedded in forms of daily life, specifically at the level of social interaction and communication, when we're talking and thinking about chatbots, when we're thinking about virtual personal assistants, softbots, and so on and so forth. I think we're all agreed. I think we've all noticed and commented on the point that a lot of this language is of a very functional nature. So it's to do with efficiency. It's to do with getting things factually right. You only have to ask your smartphone, what's the capital of Australia? Chances are it'll give you a pretty good answer and come up with Canberra. You only have to ask your smartphone what time is it in Tokyo, and you'll get the precise answer, as well as if you ask about weather, you'll get the right answer. If you actually then go on to ask, where should I have dinner tonight? Already that one becomes a little more complex. And if you start to ask broader questions about things that you might do or ought to do, let alone questions about the future, Siri is, for example, programmed to start telling you jokes. So it's an attempt to keep things light and humorous, but to get you back to, the functional and the mundane. I mean, there's obviously a reason for that, and the reason is that's roughly where machine language and natural language processing is, although part of my talk today was to underscore and capture some of the really big advances that are happening. From the vantage point of the social sciences, and I'm just mindful, I mean, if you think of something like the sort of work that Jürgen Habermas was doing in the 1970s into the early 1980s, when he was developing and refining his theory of communicative action, it's interesting really, because I guess what we're talking about is the sort of functional coordination of systems and subsystems in Habermas's approach. The actual advance from functional coordination to forms of communicative rationality. You might recall, for those of you that were in any way drawn to what Habermas was doing then, Habermas drew a lot from the insights of social psychology and the work of people like Piaget and Kohlberg and others to develop his account of different strands and different forms of moral reasoning. Again, I would venture the idea that it would be useful and perhaps edifying to know where a chatbot might score on Kohlberg's 7-stage of cognitive moral reasoning. One suspects pretty low. So the nature of the conversations that we're looking at are of a very particular kind, but nonetheless, I think there's all sorts of interesting things that social scientists and those working in the humanities can and should be doing to raise questions about, well, what's the spillover effect? What's the leftover? How is this impacting on the self? How is it impacting social relationships? And as During Sensei highlighted earlier, also questions about the future. What kinds of social worlds are we going into? We've got lots of social futures that are highlighted through science fiction. We have lots of utopian and lots of dystopian accounts of what the AI world will look like. Maybe AI will be nothing like that. Maybe a lot of what's coming with AI is actually going to be fairly pedestrian and plain. You know, maybe it's going to be just things like helping us deal with our bank, helping us book a flight and pay our taxation on time. So maybe the AI revolution is not as grand and as all spectacular as some of the technologists have it. I think the fundamental sociological point is we need different imaginings here, and not just wild forecasts about the future. We need serious, sustained social science of social futures. I haven't got time to talk about that, but I did work and was very fortunate to work with the late John Urry in the UK, and his work around social futures. I think especially the work that he did with the Foresight program in the UK is really exceptionally important for thinking about our possible futures and what they might look like. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the second half of the question, but I hope I've addressed the first half. There was quite a lot in what you raised there.
ありがとうございます。後半の部分は、そういった、AI などが、セクシュアリティや、エスニシティっていうものに対して、どういうインパクトを与えたりするのか、あるいは、そもそも与えないのかっていうところを聞かせていただきたいっていうご質問だったと思います。
Yes, so again, much AI, particularly in the form of chatbots and virtual assistants and so on, it's interesting that there is often an attempt to embody a particular character. There's often an attempt to create a personality, an identity, to fix these particular technological capabilities to different, we were talking about some of them earlier, whether it's Pepper, whether it's, well, obviously in the case of virtual assistants like Siri, to my mind, they're more interesting. They come a bit closer to the movie that was referenced earlier, Her, because we don't see them. We don't actually clap eyes on Siri. We don't get to see Alexa. Yet, I guess, people carry certain assumptions and images in their heads as to what some of these assistants are like. There is, of course, a social science literature around the gendering of virtual assistants. I mean, the fact that so many of these assistants are female is well underscored. The relationship between femininity and feminine identity on the one hand and service industries on the other, of course, is long underscored. And from that side of things, the one argument is that Silicon Valley is simply, raising patriarchy to the second power. There is quite a lot of, I think, interesting work done around all of that. I can't say I've got any claim to making contributions to those particular areas. But I would just, I guess, highlight the relationship between the visible and the invisible. I mean, I do think it's very important that a lot of what we're talking about, when I mentioned earlier that like God or globalization, you don't actually get to see this, it's felt through its effects. So I think that's very powerful. And I think particularly against the backdrop of not only the sexual revolution from the 1960s onwards, but all of the transformations we're seeing today in terms of sexual identities, in terms of things like Black Lives Matter. There are so many broader, large-scale global transformations underway that it's impossible not to see the digital revolution as wrapped up and really deeply interwoven with all of these large-scale shifts.
ありがとうございます。その先ほどからの議論の中での文脈で、他にもフロアの先生方からご質問賜ってて、もし他の先生方も Q&A、ご質問あれば Q&A の方に、コメントを頂戴できればと思うんですが、今ご質問いただいているのは、英語でご質問いただいてるんですけど、もし感情っていうものが、なんていうかな、プログラミングされてるっていうことだったら、いうことかな。AI と人間っていうものの違いってどこにあるのっていう、そういうことなのかな。合ってるのかな。ちょっとそのまま読んでみましょうか。どっからAI does not seem to be emotional.
遠藤先生、下の方に日本語も書かれております。
あ、そうですか。すいません。ありがとうございます。あ、ここか。すいません。AI に感情がプログラムされていることが理由であれば、感情を AI に教え込むことで、AI も感情によって変わることがあるんじゃないか。AI に感情を教え込むことは、AI と人間の関係を人間関係と同じものにすることができるんじゃないか。で、もしそうじゃないんだったら、AI に感情を教え込むことで、人間と変わらないっていうんじゃなくて、やっぱり変わるよねっていうことだったら、AI と人間の本質的な違いはどこにあるのっていう、そういうご質問ですね。ありがとうございます。はい、神田先生、何か。
先ほどのところで私もちょっと非常に面白い遠藤先生の指摘だったので、ふと思ったことがあったんですが、でまさに今ご質問私、ビデオいいかな。今ご質問いただいた点、まさに私思ってたところも関わるんですけど、先ほどちょっと私が例として挙げたやつ、ですね、ちょっと画面共有していいですかね。例がどこ行った？これか。共有できてますかね。どっかに書いてたんだ。先ほどちょっとお話ししましたけども、この安全運転、できてますかね。安全運転するというところで、仲良くなれるって書いてるんですけども、急ブレーキ踏むと怒ります。キャラクターが。もうみたいなこけて。あと、なんかその安全運転じゃなくなると、 私は今まで家出させたことはないんですが、家出していなくなっちゃうらしいんですね。要は、キャラクターが感情表現をしてるんですね。で、安全運転してるとなんかアイテムがもらえると。で、そういうことをしたくなくて、まあ私はもう最近どうでもよくなってるというか、あんまこれつけてないんですけども、そういうことをしたくて安全運転をするという方向が示唆されてるんですね。で、そうすると、先ほどのでいけば、ありがとうということによって、客として上質な客というふうに認識されるということによって、またさらに違うサービスが提供されるということが、例えば背後にあったとして、乗客だから普通の客にはなかったサービスを、例えばある特定の部屋をオープンにするとかですね、そういうアルゴリズムを作っていくとすれば、客の方もいい客としても振る舞わざるを得なくなってくる。この客はありがとうを定期的に言うから良さそうな客だから値段を下げようとかですね、そういうプログラムだって作れる可能性があるので、この感情のあたりは、プログラム、AI 自体が感情を持っているかどうかちょっと分かりませんけども、感情を持っているように振る舞わせて人をコントロールしたりすることとかサービスを変えることは可能なんじゃないかなと思って聞いてました。でもこれ非常に面白いテーマで、ちょっと私はまだ追求できてないですけども、すごい探求すべきテーマかなというふうに考えます。以上です。
ありがとうございます。すごい面白いご指摘だと思うんです。で、エリオット先生の、お言葉を使わせていただくと、その感情もアルゴリズムで作られてる。だからアルゴリズム的感情っていうことだとすると、そこがやっぱり AI っていうところなのかなっていうふうに思うんですよね。じゃあ、人間の感情はアルゴリズムじゃないのかっていうところは、まあ、私もそんなに自信ないんですけど、そのあたり、エリオット先生、いかがでしょうか。エリオット先生にちょっと振らせていただく形で。
Thank you. I think this is actually one of the most fascinating questions that we've touched on this afternoon. And I would simply say this. So humans are part and parcel of complex systems which emerge out of families. And in emerging out of these families, we are not only repetitive, but we largely exist in and through repetition. The notion of repetition was absolutely critical to Freud's writings. And of course, part of his argument was that in order to survive and in order to live an ordinary life, one learns certain kinds of repetitions. We learn these repetitions usually through our principal caretakers, most typically the biological mother and father, but obviously there can be various variations of that. Now, for the human, Freud's argument was that a certain amount of repetition is needed in order to be alive and to stay alive. The problem is too much repetition makes us absolutely miserable and depressed, and it's the work of psychoanalysis, as it were, to try to unlock what Herbert Marcuse called the kind of surplus repressions. By contrast, if you're talking about intelligent automated machines, we're talking about repetitions as well, but the difference to humans is that, in effect, they're only repetitions. Automated intelligent machines, at least as they currently exist, are nothing but the repetitions that are built up through deep learning, machine learning, neural networks, and so on, and they literally can't do anything else. I mean, there are forms of innovation, which I tried to get at talking about Google Duplex, but it's very rudimentary. By contrast, I think the big issue for us as contemporary women and men, therefore, is how much, sort of, when is too much repetition? When is repetition too much? That's the first point. And I think the second point is, in contrast to automated intelligent machines, how much can contemporary women and men tolerate of the experience of actually being alive. Yeah. So the more you're aware of being alive, I would argue the less there is the hold of repetition. But the problem is, as you become more aware of the terrors of being alive, it can be frightening. So you need the routine, you need the mundane, you need the repetitious to give a sense of containment to your life. I'm sorry, I've digressed a bit, but anyway, I think there's a very sharp set of contrasts between the psyche of human beings on the one side and the programmability of automated intelligent machines. And this really takes us back to during Sensei's earlier point about intimacy, because I think, yes, can the emotions be programmed? Well, I think there's a fantasy. I think there's a cultural fantasy out there that, yes, we can program human emotions, but I would suggest it's largely that. It's a cultural fantasy, albeit a very powerful one. Arigatou gozaimasu.
もう一人、ご質問いただいてて、非常に興味深い点で、感情表現っていう場合、感情あるいは感情的な反応が標準化、規格化されることにならないのか、それからそうだとしたらどのような基準に従って規格化されているのか、いくのかっていうご質問ですね。これはだから、AI の感情表現っていう場合、標準化、規格化される、アルゴリズム化されているもので、じゃあそれはそのアルゴリズムだとすればするで、どんな基準に従ってそれはアルゴリズムっていうのを構築しているのかっていうことにつなげていいのかな。そこまでは言ってはおられないのかもしれませんけど、いかがでしょうか。もし違ってたら後でまた追加ご質問ください。感情表現的なものを作り出すっていうことはそうなんですけど、その感情表現的なものを何を基準に作るっていうことができるのかっていうことなのかなと思うんですけど、違うのかな。エリオット先生いかがですか。なんか私の表現が分かりにくいかもしれませんけど。
No. On the contrary, I think you've done a very good job in trying to tease out the broader elements of the question. But I'm not sure I fully whether this goes in the direction of what the questioner is asking. But it's something nonetheless that I often think about. That is the way in which automated intelligent machines, and on the basis of what we're talking about today, virtual assistants, softbots, chatbots, and so on, the way these machines embed, contain, and re-embed all sorts of certain emotional and cognitive assumptions and presumptions of the designers that have actually made those systems. So here I'm talking about, obviously, for example, the assumptions and presumptions of computer scientists and engineers and design analysts, so that whenever we're talking about a particular piece of equipment, this is why I say that the technology doesn't stand apart from us, completely separated off in a hermetically sealed domain. It's actually shot through with all sorts of, gendered, racist, ethnic, and ageist all sorts of assumptions, presumptions, ideologies, and thought processes, because of course, those engineers, those computer scientists, those design analysts have not worked on the development of these complex algorithms from somewhere outside of Earth. It's not as if this algorithm was simply parachuted in from outer space and then we've operationalized it and we can be sure that it's neutral. In fact, if you look at most of the social science research, for example, on the relationship between, say, algorithmic life on the one hand and the perpetuation and extension of racist ideologies on the other, what we're seeing is the dramatic intensification of various forms of racism in and through, and obviously racist emotion in and through these automated intelligent machines. So that's a shorthand for saying that, where does it come from? Well, it's coming from the humans that are programming and developing and designing the actual machines. It's interesting though, because, a lot of this, of course, that doesn't mean that that's where it finishes. These things are reflexive, these things are circular, and the companies that do much of this design get feedback and comment, and then alterations can be made. But I think you've only got to look at something like, the instance that happened with the racist bot Tay on Twitter. That was, I think, basically that had to be taken down within 24 hours because of the sheer amount of racist comments and tweets that particular bot was making after 24 hours of going live on Twitter. And that was simply through, the bot learning from its fellow humans how to generate some of the worst of humanity. So, it's a complex situation, but you could say that these machines are containers in time. They hold the past in them in terms of all sorts of assumptions and presumptions that are circulating in social life in space and time at any one point.
ありがとうございます。リフレクシビティっていう言葉をちょっと今いただいたんですけど、AI の再帰性っていうのはどっちかというと適応的な、いわゆるアダプショナルなリフレクシビティなのかなっていう感じがして、割と人間のリフレクシビティっていうのは、自己の変容っていうものが関わるトランスフォーメーショナルなリフレクシビティ、トランスフォーメーショナルリフレクシビティっていうことで、もし違いを言うことができるのかなと思ったりもしたんですが、いかがでしょうか。
Sumimasen, I didn't quite understand. So reflexivity and transformation? I didn't quite get
変容的な再帰性っていう、自分もどんどん変わっていくし、相手も変わっていくっていう、そういう変容的な再帰性と、むしろその相手の反応に対して適応するような再帰性っていう、そういうのが AI っていうふうに言えるのかなと思うんですけど、むしろ人間っていうのはその適応っていうよりも、単なるなんか刺激に対する反応ではなくて、それじゃないなんか違う変容っていうものがトランスフォーメーショナルな、ものがあるような気がするんですけど、わかりにくいですかね。
Well, it's certainly very complex. I think, again, AI systems tend to be what we're talking about are complex computational and informational systems. Arguably, we as people, as humans, we are complex informational systems too. but as I was trying to tease out earlier, we work in quite different ways. The self is not a machine, although there are attempts to make the machines increasingly self-like. At the level of reflexivity, I think we see this quite well. For instance, the revolution of mobile phones. Once upon a time, not that long ago, if I had arranged to meet you, say in Osaka, we would establish a time and a date, and I had to be there and you had to be there. Otherwise, we wouldn't meet and we would miss each other. That's no longer the case. We can still say that we will meet at the Hilton Hotel in Osaka at 3 p.m. on Thursday, but if you send me a message and text me that you're running late, and I say to you, well, actually, I've already left the hotel, we can arrange to meet across the road at the subway 15 minutes later. Well, it's a trivial example, but I think what it captures is the way in which social life now is increasingly, that is not incidental to the actual production of social life. It's where the circularity of the information is coming to actually impact upon and restructure what the actual activity is. So if that's happening with mobile phones, I think it's also happening with AI-powered systems. But to go back to our earlier points today, a lot of the time we're not aware of it. We don't go around holding all of this in our minds, partly because we don't need to. These systems seem to function. You arrive, well, you used to before COVID-19, you'd arrive at an airport, airport doors magically open for most people, but of course they don't for everyone. So that's interesting, the sort of facial recognition technology as linked to AI systems, credit cards, as I say, mobile phones, our laptop computers, all of these devices, we don't have to hold most of it in mind. Yet I would suggest that somewhere, perhaps pre-consciously, certainly at a kind of semi-conscious or perhaps even some kind of unconscious architecture to how we live our lives, we are aware of this because, as I mentioned earlier, it floods in when things go wrong. When things go wrong with systems, I think that's when we become particularly aware of our dependence, our path dependence on these very systems for the worlds that we're bound up with. And it's fascinating, I'll finish with this, but it is fascinating to think that if the AI-powered systems that we've been talking about go down, if they crash, not only are you talking about the crashing of AI, you're talking really about the crashing of electricity, of power, of water, of the very core fabric of what modern societies, again, the sort of the underbelly, the infrastructure of how modern societies are produced and reproduced. ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。最後になると思うんですけど、もし須藤先生何か簡単なっていうのはあれなんですけど、コメントあれば。
ですね、いろんな方が質問なさったんですけど、一番多いのは規格化標準化の問題ですよね。で、人間は、他者と、相互作用するときには、で、その中で自分というものを、I も me も、generate others ですね。なんかコンフリクトの中で作るわけですね。ってことは、人間は失敗することによって、人から学ぶというところがありますよね。で、それは相手も失敗してる。こっちも失敗するって、両方が失敗する中で、ものを学ぶわけですよね。そうすると、相手はAI はですね、失敗しないわけですよね。失敗するふりぐらいしますけども、失敗しないわけですよ。そうすると私は失敗する、相手は失敗しないと。 いうふうにしていると、だんだん失敗することがいけないことだというふうにこう企画化されていくっていう恐れもあるんです。これはもうちょっとタークル的な、答えで、ちょっと、僕もですね、タークルは乗り越えなきゃいけないと思ってるんですけど、エリオット先生はこういうところはどういうふうに思うんでしょうね。はい。
エリオット先生、いかがでしょうか。
Simply to say that, yeah, I agree with much of that. I mean, the failures and where the failures are within the systems, and really what it is that we as people are prepared to own, what it is that we're trying to disown, what it is we're trying to get rid of. I mean, I think that came up in the conversation about intimacy. In the same way that we're able to displace onto others all sorts of aspects of our own experience that we're not wanting to recognize, it seems that we can also do that in both positive and negative ways with automated intelligent machines. And I think one of the really crucial questions for the future of a lot of the social science of AI research is how do we bridge a gap? How do we bridge what C.P. Snow called the Great Divide between, on the one hand, the kind of technical specialists, and then us, as it were, the specialists of the social sciences and the humanities, as well as indeed our, just our everyday fellow citizens who may not have the technical language to perhaps fully join in this conversation, but are part of the conversation that's happening around the great global AI debate. So I'd like to, just picking up on Pseudo Sensei's comments, again, just thank everyone, because I think what's really emerged this afternoon is, yes, these are academic issues. The AI transformation is impacting the landscape of social science and humanities research, but it's more than that. This is not just an academic debate. This is not a debate that's going on in classrooms. It's actually affecting the texture of our lives. It's changing the fabric of societies. We haven't had much chance, and I thought there might be some more questions on this, and maybe they were buried away there from in the notes that people are sending through. I thought there might have been more on the relationship between AI and the global pandemic of COVID-19, because much of what we've seen this year, of course, has been a dramatic acceleration of digitalization, partly brought about by the crisis that has been COVID-19. So perhaps, look, we can have another whole seminar, another symposium about that. I will, however, if I can, just finish with one further comment. Someone, and I forget who, remarked earlier that previously, I had said earlier today that it's very nice to be with you all, but I would much rather actually be there in person. And I talked about the limits of digitalization. It is, of course, wonderful that we can all press a button and click in and have this discussion and have this dialogue. But the reason I did say that is I do remember the remarkable hospitality and the warmth of feeling really very welcome at Ritsumeikan and to the Kansai region more generally. When following this seminar, following this symposium, I was taken out by Endo Sensei and Fujimaki Sensei, and we had a really fabulous evening. And I guess when I press the button, the most I can go and do today is to go and have a drink of Kirin and to toast you all. Arigatou gozaimasu.
ありがとうございました。最後に、言っていただいたんですけど、グローバル社会の中で、特に新型ウイルス感染症の、COVID-19 以後の、 グローバル社会の中で、私たちの日常生活っていうのが、まさにこういう、ズームもそうですけど、デジタル革命に支えられて、日常生活の中にもう入り込んでる。で、その中で私たちが今日、エリオット先生のご講演から考えたことっていうのは、本当に重要な議論になっていくのかなっていうふうに思います。本日は本当にエリオット先生ありがとうございました。I would like to express my deep thanks for your kindness and your exciting speech.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone today. Arigatou gozaimasu. Thank you.
それでは、これで、シンポジウム AI 以後の人文社会科学を問うを、終わらせていただきたいと思いますけれども、まだまだ議論は尽きないとは思うんですが、一旦これで、締めさせていただきたいと思います。本日もちろんエリオット先生、それからパネリストの先生方、本当にありがとうございました。あと、本日、ご参加いただった先生方も長時間本当にありがとうございました。あと通訳の方、同時通訳の方、運営者の皆さん、それから研究所スタッフの事務局の皆さん、本当にありがとうございました。皆さんありがとうございました。ありがとうございました。
ありがとうございます。
エリオット先生、we hope you to see to come again soon here.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
We hope you to come again soon here soon. And,
thank you so much.
We want to have the time at the drinking session at the
very important, and please be assured it's high on my agenda. I'm very eager to return to Osaka. I hope I can do that in 2021. Thank you again.
So much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Sayonara.